It's chaos.
It's a different type of Sunday scary.
It's your newest obsession.
It's Dirty Driving, a Formula One podcast.
We're the Hornsby sisters. I'm Katie.
And I'm Megan.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Welcome back to your favorite time of the week.
It's another episode of Dirty Driving.
And this one, we're discussing Hungary. And not how hungry I was during the race, because it was quite on brand for my stomach to be growling through the entire first two stints.
Did the intern not make you breakfast in time?
No, breakfast was not served for this race. We barely had coffee for this race. But no, I felt like it was very on brand to be absolutely starving while we were in a race in a country called Hungary.
I like that. Yeah, I had a bagel for breakfast, so I was solid.
She was not hungry while watching the Hungarian Grand Prix.
It's not hungry while watching the Hungarian Grand Prix.
I was a little hangry about some things, or like I was hungry and then some shit hit the fan, so then I got hangry.
And it's never good to be by a Hornsby who's hangry.
No, it's I think it would be about as good as the Ferrari debrief. That's what I equate. Or Max Verstappen after something's gone wrong with his vehicle.
Yeah. It gets ugly when we don't get fed in time. But we had a pretty interesting week. It was quiet until we had the big announcement, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But it was also Fernando Alonso's birthday. Lewis posted the cutest thank you to Bono, his lead engineer. And then we had a week of bucket hats. Like Lando, Valtteri, Lewis, and Guan Yu all popped out in bucket hats, which was phenomenal. So
what's so funny about them is they're ugly. Bucket hats are, in fact, ugly hats. But then you put fun designs on them and they're cute. Like the hat shape itself is ugly, but it's the design that makes it cool.
I do not support that statement. I think bucket hats are cool.
I'm sorry. If the bucket hat was poop brown, it would not be cute. The bucket hat is cute because it has got cool designs.
I don't know about that one. I love a good bucket hat, though, so
she would wear a poop brown bucket hat.
Yeah, I would. If I was wearing a poop brown colored outfit, I would put a poop brown colored bucket hat on.
No, you'd put a poop brown bucket hat with like light tan smiley faces on it, and then it would be cute.
All right. I'm still update on the other bucket hat, the one I tried to buy all last episode. It's still sold out, so we are patiently waiting for the email.
She still wore a bucket hat this weekend. It's all good. It's all good. The Dirty Driving bucket hats are coming because we couldn't not have one of those. But more importantly, we have to mention something. Sidebar to all of the Formula One stuff. It is the Pod Puppy's birthday today.
It is the Pod Puppy's birthday today. Yes,
that is the second greatest thing that happened today. Other than the fact that there was a race this morning. Second, It was Maybelline's birthday.
The Pod Puppy. She turned 4.
Yes.
She's
old.
old.
Pod Puppy turned 4. And I'll be honest, I forgot about her birthday until well after the race. So I think she spent the majority of the race pouting. Mm-hmm. In fact, she did. She spent the entire race pouting. But she's next to me.
But does she know that it's her birthday?
I would vote yes, because she pouted for 5 hours.
Okay. All right.
Now that we've talked about that, we really need to dive into the most important thing we need to discuss before the race. The most heartbreaking thing of the week. We saw some highs and we saw some lows with this. It started with the pure elation that Sebastian Vettel was joining Instagram. I felt like it was a little odd. It was a weird play. Deep down, I think I knew something was brewing, but I pushed it aside because I was hoping for some great Sebastian Vettel content, perspective. Was hoping he'd get on live and just talk about bees. But then, Katie, what happened the next day?
The next day, Sebastian Vettel posts this all black and white monotone video announcing his retirement from Formula One at the end of this season.
Heartbreak. Utter heartbreak. 2 thoughts about the video. First off, I love that he didn't cut his hair. He's like, shit, I'm going out however I want to look. Second off, I know for a fact that the night before he decided that he was retiring. Like, literally, this was not planned. So I think that actually means that he created an Instagram with no intention of posting his retirement first. And then that night was like, oops, I gotta retire.
Yeah.
Second thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Utter low budget production.
Do we even want to go there? Because I will get nasty and I don't want to get nasty.
I mean, was it endearing, the fact that he probably was just in front of some random wall? A little bit. Did I expect anything more? No. Did I want something a little bit more heartfelt as I was shedding tears to see the man leave? And he was just like, I want to spend more time with my own family and not the Stroll family. Iconic line, but I needed I needed his mood to match my feelings.
Yeah, and it simply was not. And the line that he said about how only time and rain will wash away the memories that I have left out on these tracks. You're not dying. Like, you're just retiring. Which is horrible and so sad. But, like, I felt that there was a little... I don't know. The tone of the video, too, I didn't love, but whatever.
Do we think he'll be gone for a year and then he'll come back?
Like, is he going to miss it that much? Maybe.
Are his kids going to be annoying and he's going to want to dip?
Possibly.
I mean, I don't know. There's kind of 2 sides to this in my brain. Part of me hopes that he goes on and never comes back to racing, but comes back to pioneer, lead, direct the charge for racing to become more sustainable. And the other part of me is like, you should just leave motorsport altogether. Just say, whoop, going to full send it into climate activism. And either of those options, I'm completely happy for him. But I'm just really sad to see him go. And I'm even more concerned about this whole Mick Schumacher maybe going to Aston Martin. I don't want him getting sucked into the Stroll's orbit.
That would be horrendous.
Horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. I don't think it would actually lead to any future success for him.
No. I would hope that Sebastian is doing all that he can in continuing to mentor and be a part of Mick's future and mentor him maybe to not get sucked into the Stroll family.
I mean, Sebastian Vettel's the one who said, I think Mick would be a great replacement for me.
I don't want to see it. I don't want him in green.
Only time shall tell, but I have a very, very, very bad feeling about what's about to happen. And more importantly, we do have Sebastian Vettel confirming that Lance Stroll is numero uno there, which is so freaking asinine. I can't even handle it. It's so dumb. That dude is not a good race car driver. I understand daddy bought him the team, but like, good Lord, back somebody who's good for gosh sakes. I don't know. That's a whole different kind of conversation, but that's where I stand on all of the Sebastian Vettel fallout. I did really love that all the drivers were asked about it this weekend. Everyone barring Alonso, who said, I think he needs a haircut. had really heartfelt words for him. And I know everyone's going to miss him. I'm going to miss him. I don't want the season to end. They should add 4 more races.
I read somewhere that he's going to finish, I can't remember what the hundreds place is, but like, I'm just going to say 299. He's ending on a 99 and people are like petitioning for one more race. So he ends on like an even 100 of a number.
No, I like the 99. It feels weirdly him. I also, look, if both championships are freaking decided before Abu Dhabi, I vote 19 other cars just stop racing and they let Sebastian Vettel win. Wow, I just butchered that. They let Sebastian Vettel win his last race.
That would be incredible.
That's what I want.
That would be incredible.
I don't care if he qualifies 20th in Abu Dhabi, but both championships are decided. I think the rest of the 19 drivers pull off to the side and let Vettel through, and they just parade. I'd watch the parade. I'd watch however many laps Abu Dhabi is. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. I want Sebastian Vettel leading all of them.
Wow. Well, I'm
and then
getting goosebumps.
Do donuts at the end. And then all 20 drivers do donuts at the end.
All for Sebastian.
Should I write a letter? I think I'm going to write a letter.
I think you should. That would probably be good for you to write the letter.
Dear the entire grid, here's what I think should happen. Step 1, decide both championships. Step 2, regardless of where Vettel qualifies for the last race, everybody lets him through. They still fit it. They don't DNF. They just don't. Vettel just wins.
Yeah, and that would be incredible. I mean, I would pay money to see that. I'd fly to Abu Dhabi and see that if we knew it was going to happen.
If we could guarantee that was going to happen, I would be there. Also, last thing about the Vettel thing before we'll move on, I'm very, very happy that we're going to another race so that I can see him in person
one last time.
Again.
Yeah. He's leaving us, the 4-time world champion with 53 wins, 122 podiums. He also holds the most wins in a season with 13, the most poles in a season with 15. He's had 4 Grand Slams, the most wins in a row with 9, and he was the youngest pole sitter and youngest world champion. So he is leaving us with a legacy.
I mean, the dude's legacy is unmatched. Unmatched. He is phenomenal. He is absolutely phenomenal, and it is sad to see him go. But very happy for him nonetheless. In other news this week, we have a green Red Bull, LOL, but this weekend brought us the white Ferrari. We knew it was coming. And if you didn't think it was coming, then clearly you weren't reading the signs. Because they would have freaking told you that Gunther Steiner was planning this Ferrari imitation, Ferrari 2.0 in a different color all year, waiting and waiting and waiting, not having any upgrades, and then boom, debuting them in Hungary. So we officially got them. I don't think this weekend showed us the success of those upgrades. Qualifying wasn't great for either driver. The race wasn't great for either driver. I will be interested to see what those upgrades do in the coming races. I haven't written them off yet. Full send. Haven't done that. The other interesting upgrade, and I'm calling it the James Bond technical loophole, that Aston Martin debuted with these rear wing curves that don't violate the rules, but definitely go outside the spirit of the rules. I'm calling them James Bond, and I think Aston Martin's been watching a little too many of the videos and maybe paying too much attention to what Q is doing and cooking up in the laboratory or dungeon, wherever Q works. It's always in the basement, so it is a dungeon, and it's always in a lab type thing. So I think that's fair to say. But they literally look like guns. I'm sorry, they look like a rocket could be fired out of them to take out the tires of the car in front of them. And really, I think that's a better strategy than what they have going for them.
Beautiful.
Again, I don't know if that technical loophole is going to do much for them, considering they ended in P10, P11. The only difference from last race was that they swapped positions. I don't know. We'll see if any other teams copy this James Bond esque 007 shooting gun looking things out of the back of the Aston Martin. Jeez Louise, Aston.
Well, I will bring us right into our circuit update. If you didn't know or forgot, we were racing in Hungary this weekend at the Hungaroring, which I said it earlier, but I think that's one of my favorite F1 words, the Hungaroring. It took only 9 months to build the track, and stylistically, it looks and feels like a karting circuit. It's got a flowing sequence of linked corners, which make it very popular for a high-speed qualifying lap. And historically, this track has had not as great success with passing, and so just the reputation is that it's a hard spot to pass. Turn 1 would tell you differently, as we saw plenty of overtakes into Turn 1 this weekend. And it is most similar to Monaco in the style. We often say that it's Monaco without the walls in both style and downforce. It requires a well-sorted chassis over power, and the track is narrow and dusty from the lack of use. And in 2003, it was slightly modified to increase passing as well.
This weekend, it was the 37th Hungarian Grand Prix, which debuted on the calendar in 1986, and it's run interrupted since then. And all of those races have been held at the Hungaroring. I will agree with Katie. It is a fun word to say. Other than Monza, this is like a weird stat, so I have to make sure I say it correctly. Other than Monza, it has the longest consecutive running of Grand Prix held there. I guess the better stat is a better way of saying that, other than Monza and Monaco, it's the circuit that has the most continuous Grand Prix ran there. See, it's hard to say. It's a weird stat, but it's also pretty interesting considering there's plenty of other Grand Prix that have existed longer, but this one has been at the same circuit. So, additionally, interesting facts from this weekend as well. So, Lewis Hamilton is the most successful driver at this track, and he actually, after this weekend, has raced the most laps at the Hungaroring of any other driver. And again, another weird stat to kind of think about. But Lewis Hamilton has won in Hungary 8 times, which is twice as many victories as Michael Schumacher has here, who is second on the list. Lewis won 3 times with McLaren and then 5 times with Mercedes. Most recently, he won in 2020. Last year, we had an Esteban Ocon victory. Fun fact about all of F1, no driver has won 9 times at a single Formula One venue. So, interesting fact. Other than Lewis Hamilton being the most successful driver, the most successful team here is McLaren. They've had 11 victories in their history. And on the grid, both Alpine drivers, I mentioned for Esteban Ocon winning last year, but both Alpine drivers took their maiden victories here. Fernando Alonso took his in 2003. So I have a feeling maybe, ahead of the weekend, I was like, if they both took their maiden victories, maybe it'll be a good weekend for Alpine. I think it was. Even after the bad strategy, I think they came out pretty decent. I'm going to go with decent. Additionally, this race, or the race at the Hungaroring, has been won from the front row 22 times in its 37 years. So, statistically, it should have been a Russell or Sainz victory, but we all know what happened. And if you don't, you should probably look at the stats at this point. Other than Alonso and Esteban, we have plenty of other drivers who have won at this circuit before. We have Hamilton, we have Ricciardo, and we have Vettel all taking victories in the past at the Hungaroring. I did mention Verstappen. He hadn't previously won here until this year, but he did take his maiden pole victory, or his maiden pole position here. That's not a victory. I don't know why I tried to say that. This weekend, we saw that maiden pole for George Russell, who, interesting fun fact, he took his first points for Williams, his first points in the F1 here last year. So kind of a cool weekend. Lots of firsts happening at the Hungaroring. So I feel like looking at all those stats, we knew it should have been like an exciting and wild weekend. I don't think it really disappointed us at all. Going into this weekend, Max Verstappen was 63 points ahead of Charles Leclerc after the DNF in France, and Red Bull was comfortably ahead of Ferrari. Mercedes on the other hand, was catching up to Ferrari, and this weekend only expedited Mercedes' charge for P2 in the constructors. Binotto ahead of this weekend was wanting, expecting, planning, telling the media that Ferrari was going to have a 1-2. My response to that is LOL. That didn't happen. So let's talk about how we got there. It's interesting because Friday was completely dominated by the Ferraris. Both Ferrari drivers went fastest, each in one session. Katie, before we get too far into FP1, we need to discuss the Checo Perez sneezing into the radio in FP1. Was that the weirdest thing you've seen all year?
Weirdest thing I've seen all career time watching Formula One. Because think about when you sneeze when you're driving, your eyes close for a second and you maybe move the wheel a little depending on how great you are at sneezing. I could not imagine going 200 plus miles per hour and sneezing multiple times in a row. And then just saying...
Inside of a helmet.
Inside of a helmet. I forgot about that part, sorry. Oh, gross.
With the balaclava on.
And then...
into the radio.
Into the radio. And then just saying like, oh, it's the hay fever. It must be the allergies.
Which... I don't know if you caught it, but I went back and watched the sneezing. They were talking about allergy pills and how drivers have to be careful about which allergy pills they take because some of them contain like substances that are technically on the banned substance list. So some of the best allergy medicines they can't actually take. I just feel like that's so fucked up. Because look, they're going real freaking fast and they're sneezing. What happens if Checo had that like mid-battle with whoever? You know what I mean? Like what happens? Oh my gosh, how pissed. Imagine this. Checo and Max are battling it out. Checo has a sneezing attack.
Oh my God.
Runs in to Verstappen Baku style, but it's all because of the hay fever.
There would be an implosion. Like, I think we would see the Red Bull pit wall actually implode.
All because of allergies.
And you know what? The next day, all of those allergy meds would have been allowed.
Oh, absolutely. Christian would have been stomping his way. Senator Palpatine would have been right behind him, pushing people out of the way. That was a dig on him pushing Kelly Piquet out of the way at the France Grand Prix. If you haven't seen it, go look at the video. Okay. Other important things about FP1, other than the sneezing incident, we had Robert Kubica, who took the wheel for our bucket hat model extraordinaire, Valtteri Bottas. But realistically, the only other important thing that I took from FP1 was the fact that the McLarens are looking quick, which continued in FP2 that was topped by Charles Leclerc, but Lando freaking Norris, bucket hat extraordinaire 2.0, went second fastest, and Ricciardo actually went fifth fastest. So it was another solid session for McLaren, and I was hoping for some magic this weekend. I was hoping. I feel like they're starting to understand that car. They feel like they're starting to understand the upgrades. I left Friday with like a positive spin on the weekend. Didn't totally go away, but I'm still a little peeved. Other thing about FP2 that I don't know if you felt, Katie, give me your thoughts on this. It felt kind of like a testing session. It was not very representative of what was going to happen the rest of the weekend because they knew that the temperatures were going to plummet and there was the potential for rain. So the session kind of felt not necessarily as useless as like FP2 before a sprint, but it didn't really feel representative of what was going to happen for the rest of the weekend.
Yeah, I agree. It felt almost uncomfortable to watch in the idea of it just not normally how FP2 feels at all.
None of the data coming out of it felt necessarily completely representative of the true race pace that we were going to see. It was good to see that the McLarens had a good session, though. I'll leave it at that. Finally, we get to Saturday morning, and here is the first, I guess technically the second after the sneezing, part of the weekend that I said, what the F1? I know that's the name of another news outlet, but literally in my head, I said WTF Formula One. So I get us what the F1. I can't even say this without laughing. Nicholas Latifi went fastest in FP3. I mean, where did they dig that photo up from? The archives? Did they even have that photo? Or did they have to Photoshop it?
They asked him to pose. They said, he got out of the car. They said, quick, come stand against this white wall. Because we don't have a photo of you going for the fastest because...
It's not even a thought.
It's not even a thought. And I didn't watch FP3 live. So when Megan texted me, or when I went on Instagram or whatever, wherever I saw it first, and I was like, this has got to be a joke. Like, this isn't real. This is not real. So then I was like, all right, let me put it on and watch. And I skipped to the end at the beginning, and I watched the end, and I'm like, I guess this is real. And then I watched the whole thing, and I was like, what's going on? What is going on? But go ahead, Megan, you take it away.
Basically, it was all because of that massive weather change. FP3 was marred by cool temperatures and rain. It was a battle between, are they going to be on the inters or are they going to be on the wets? So it went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Well, not that many times, but you know what I mean. It was an interesting session because I feel like watching it, I was trying to figure out what strategy they were going to go for in qualifying. If it rained, if it drizzled, if it half rained, half drizzled. I was honestly planning for qualifying to be kind of piecemeal. Half the track is drier than the other half. Some of it's really wet. I thought it was going to lead to a quite startling qualifying that might see some oddities. At the end of the day, we find out that qualifying is dry, and FP3 was essentially like a throwaway practice session. We didn't see a ton of people do laps. Unfortunately, the person to get out of FP3 in horrible predicaments was Sebastian Vettel in the Aston Martin. He went into the wall in sector 2, brought out the red flag. But luckily, Aston Martin's pretty good and has learned how to do those quick fixes after all the incidents this year. So guess that's a good thing-ish. They have the practice. I don't know if you want it even, though. That brings us to the afternoon. It was only a 30% chance of rain for qualifying. We didn't see any rain. I think we saw maybe a couple of drizzles. But basically, the biggest conversation was that the rain from that morning had washed away all of the rubber on the track. So it was going to be interesting to see how the drivers were going to manage tires and see how the track would evolve over the session. At the end of the day, we know what happens. Mr. George, Mr. Saturday, and Mr. Consistency Russell showed up and decided to take a maiden pole. It was wild. Let's just point out that George Russell is the type of guy who puts it on pole and says, it doesn't matter without Sunday results. That's the kind of guy George Russell is. How did we get there? Let's talk it through. Q1, luckily the Aston Martin mechanics, like I said, with all that practice, were able to make it happen and get Sebastian Vettel's car ready to go after that nasty crash in FP3. Other than that, we had some more conversation about track limits. Jesus, they're never going away, and I feel like they're just going to get worse. Pierre Gasly got out of the drop zone to then go back into the drop zone after his lap time was deleted due to track limits at turn 5. Then, another weird moment, number 3 of the weekend, we have both Williams went fastest in Sector 1. Nicholas Latifi was fastest in Sector 1. But then we're out and in the drop zone because they fucked it all away in Sector 3. So going from purple sectors to whatever is beyond yellow in my brain, double yellow, like the flags in Sector 3. Ultimately, we had Yuki out, Alex Albon out, Sebastian Vettel out, Pierre Gasly, and Nicholas Latifi. And still, I just keep getting so distraught about Gasly's qualifying performance. Then in Q2, had a weird situation with Perez. I think we're at weird situation number 4 for the weekend.
Maybe 5.
Where Sergio Perez lost a lap time due to track limits. Then they played the replay on F1 TV. And look, I might not be great at track limits when it's happening live because of TV direction, but the replay that F1 TV had of the back of his car, I was like, that's not track limits. They're going to give it back to him. Next thing you know, the stewards give him the lap time back, but it's ultimately not enough for Perez to make it out of Q2 and goes out to make it to Q3 and goes out in Q2. Numbers are so hard, everyone. Other than that, it went Checo Perez was out, Zhao was out, Magnussen was out, Stroll is out, and Schumacher. Interesting to note here, Lance Stroll did out-qualify Sebastian Vettel, and K-Mag out-qualified Mick Schumacher. Then we get to Q3. 2 incidents here. Well, there aren't incidents. 2 problems. First, we have Max Verstappen and his power loss issue, but we also have Lewis Hamilton with his DRS issue. His DRS flap wouldn't open. He ultimately qualifies P7. I am fully convinced that if he didn't have that DRS issue, it would have been a front row Mercedes lockout. I don't know who would have been on pole, but it would have been both Mercs, 1-2. I'm convinced. Nobody can take it away from me. No one can convince me otherwise because we literally don't know, but I know what would have happened. Let's talk about Max Verstappen then. So on his first run in Q3, he ruined it by his own errors when he had a massive tire lockup and had to abort the fast lap. His second fast lap at the end of time, I think it was he started at 2 minutes and 45 seconds or something. There was a power loss issue. The first message was Max, and then they were like, fail, gave some numbers that normally means you need to click some buttons, reset it. Max Verstappen responds, no power. Max says nothing works. And then we have Max doing a Max on the radio, being upset about things. I don't even know what words he said. I don't even know if it was understandable. It just sounded like Max. So Max is clearly out. He's going to ultimately qualify P10. Clearly doesn't hurt his weekend. It's just an unfortunate bump in the road for him. Then we thought it was going to be the battle of Ferraris. Sainz put it on provisional pole ahead of his teammate Charles Leclerc. But then George Russell comes through and has a good lap. Not a great lap. He didn't go fastest in any of the sectors, but he somehow put together 3 good sector times and takes his maiden pole victory ahead of Sainz, who was ahead of Leclerc, who was only 0.4 tenths, or he was only 4 tenths ahead of Lando Norris, who qualified P4. His teammate Danny Rick would qualify P9 ahead of Max Verstappen and Checo Perez. Interesting other kind of things to know. Valtteri Bottas qualified 8th. Yay. It was good to see him back in Q3. And both Alpines qualified ahead of Lewis Hamilton in P5 and P6. So another good day for them. Finally, the last little bit before I hand it over to Katie for the race is that after qualifying the Williams, Alex Albon was summoned to the stewards. I normally probably wouldn't talk about this, but it's kind of an interesting situation. Essentially, what had happened is Williams had incorrectly indicated which tires they were returning back to Pirelli. There is a rule in the rule book, if you read all of it, I went back and read it, that basically after each session, you have to electronically tell the reference number of the tires that are being returned, and then you have to physically return them. There's rules about after this session, this many, after this session, this many. Very complicated, really minutiae rules, but essentially they said that it was administrative error. It was the wrong reference number given to Pirelli versus the tires actually returned to them. Ultimately is €1,000 fine for the team. But it was a weird situation that we don't often have, and kind of something interesting to note if people are intrigued by strange rules and regulations. And with that, Katie, please tell us how my Sunday morning went from me being just hungry to fucking hangry.
I would love to, but before we jump into the race, I do have to talk about one thing, we had Gasly plus both of the Red Bulls, Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, take new internal combustion engines, turbochargers, MGU-Hs, MGU-Ks, and Gasly also additionally took a new energy store and control electronics, while both the Red Bulls opted for new exhausts. So Verstappen and Perez were both within their allocation for the above power units, so they remained in their P10 and P11 spots. Red Bull also followed the regulations and submitted a written request asking for the right to change power unit components, which is part of the process to doing so under Parc Fermé. But Gasly's changes ordinarily would not have caused a back of the grid start. And according to the stewards, all the power unit components for Pierre Gasly have been replaced without the approval of the FIA technical delegate, and this is not in accordance with Article 40.3 of the 2022 Formula One sporting regulations. Therefore, car number 10 should now be required to start the race from the pit lane according to Article 40.9b. Yes, I did reference the article numbers. So Gasly was already set to start P19, so wasn't that big of a deal for him to move into the pit lane. I said P17. I believe it's P19. Sorry if I said P17. So it wasn't the end of the world that he moved to the pit lane to start the race out. Which brings us to the race, because it was lights out and away we went, and George Russell got away clean at the start of the race, had to defend Carlos Sainz, who attempted to overtake him on the outside of turn 1. And let me tell you, turn 1, get ready. Megan, if you want, you can go ahead and count how many times I'm about to say turn 1 in this race debrief, because that's where all the action took place. But in the start, Norris was side by side with Leclerc, but Charles managed to remain ahead. Hamilton got up to P5 with Verstappen up to 8th, while Ricciardo dropped to P11. And thanks to replays, we saw that there was some brief contact between Daniel and Kevin, where Magnussen also fell down to P10, and then Zhao had just like a horror start and fell down to P17. So lots of movement, lots of changing of spaces in the first lap. And before the first lap was even over, we had a virtual safety car thanks to a run-in between Albon and Stroll. Albon received damage to his front wing, causing debris that needed to be cleared, which is what triggered the virtual safety car and then sent Albon into the pits for new tires and a new front wing as well. Moving on. Daniel and Kevin were fighting hard for P10, while Verstappen made his move around both Alonso and Ocon. Perez was right behind him and passing Ocon in turn 1. That's another turn 1. And the Red Bulls were then up to 6th and 7th, respectively, with Max in the lead. Then both Hamilton and Verstappen in consecutive corners were able to pass Lando, taking 3rd and 4th, followed by Perez taking a position away from Lando as well. So, again, lots of movement in the first 10 laps. It was honestly hard to keep track. It was hard taking notes this race. I will own up to that one. Then we had George pitting in lap 17. He came back on track with a fight with Alonso. So came back to greet Alonso. They had a little battle. George was able to stay ahead and picked off Alonso's teammate Ocon as well the very next lap. A few laps later, on 24, we had Russell back into the lead. And on lap 28, we saw this battle for first erupt between Charles and George. And we saw great defending from George until lap 28, when Charles takes a late lunge down the outside of turn 1, that's number 3, cutting across to the inside and taking the lead of the race. Something that was also hard to keep track of this race was who was in the lead, how many drivers were in the lead, because at one point it was Charles, at one point it was Max, it was George, it was Lewis, it was Carlos. I feel like everyone got a turn. It was a battle between 6 cars all race long, and they all got a turn taking the lead.
The only one who didn't have a chance to be in the lead was
Checo, yeah. He never was in the lead, but I think belongs in the battle of the six for this race. I crowned Daniel Ricciardo the overtake of the race. Correct me, Megan, if you thought there was a better overtake. I did really like the Charles on George, but Daniel Ricciardo managed, to get around both Alpines with his moves, and I felt like we got to see a little bit of the old Daniel, so I gave him overtake of the day.
And then he went right back to being his normal ass self.
Yeah.
Causing a collision, 5-second penalty, ending in the shitter. Like, okay, the new Daniel's back.
Yeah. If only he had given
some
us
highs, we had some lows.
If only he had given us a more stellar race, he might have been our honorable mention, but nope. In lap 35, we had a yellow flag due to Yuki spinning out, and we started to see a few drops of rain. A few laps later, in lap 40, we see Charles' race ruined when he pits, and they put hard tires on the car. Another poor strategy call, but Ferrari, I don't want to talk about it right now, Megan. We'll talk about it in a little bit.
I don't want to talk about it at all.
We don't have to talk about it at all, but yeah, it's horrible.
We have to, but I don't
we
want
will. So in that moment, it stood Sainz, Hamilton, Leclerc, and Verstappen in the top four. Max was able to take Charles into turn one, followed by Max taking a little spin in the penultimate corner of lap 42, but he recovered and then had to retake Charles a couple laps later in lap 45, again, coming out of turn one, while Daniel, back to his new self, like Megan mentioned, and Lance had a run-in with Lance spinning. In lap 52, we had Hamilton leading the race. He pit and Max inherited the lead. And Megan, I do have to ask you this question. Did you have any thought about Max winning this race when you woke up this morning?
No.
Yeah.
I should have, but I didn't.
I didn't. And I feel like the whole race, I didn't know who was going to take the win, but I still didn't think it was going to be Max until the end. So
the minute they put hards on Charles, I said it was over. You can even check that with the intern. At that point, he was awake and we were having coffee, no food, and I was hangry. I was like, "Are you fucking kidding, Ferrari? Putting hards on? Did you not look at what the Alpines perform?" I can't.
It's too much. It's simply too much. So we see George overtake Charles for the umpteenth time, thanks to the shitty, slow, hard tires. And Matteo walked off the pit wall and went to the back of the garage. He was done.
Where'd he go? Hopefully to find a new strategist.
We'll get into that.
Hide from the Italians.
He must get death threats. He's got to.
I mean, I would never condone that, but I feel like the passionate Italians would probably maybe consider like beating him with an Italian loaf of bread. Surprised they haven't thrown tomatoes at him yet.
Tomato, tomato, tomato. My friends and I yell that at each other when we do something bad, and it's tomato, tomato, tomato.
Then literally you should be yelling tomato, 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 tomato during races, most races, when Ferrari just decides that they are like, oh, we could take this win or we could just not. And they're like, we'll just not. Ay caramba. There's a reason I'm not wearing a Ferrari shirt right now. I refuse to be seen in public in it.
It's hard to be a Ferrari fan right now. It is just hard to be a Ferrari fan right now. But with 8 laps left in the race, it was looking like a Max Verstappen victory with Russell, Sainz, Hamilton, and Perez following him. Lewis Hamilton absolutely shined in the last laps, passing both Sainz, then Russell, both in the turn 1 spot. So I'm going to say it now. We got to talk about turn 1. Why is it the only place that there's action on this whole entire track?
It's the only place that is really good for overtaking. It's after they've gotten DRS on the main straight. They're able to pull close enough, and essentially it's whoever breaks right, dives. Well, so you can, it depends. There basically is, you have the opportunity in turn one, but then you have the like skirt around if they're defending out of turn one, then like they might be able to hold you off on turn one, but in their defense, they don't have the ability to get on the throttle fast enough to get into turn two. And so the car has the opportunity there. It really truthfully is the best place to overtake on that track. Really the only place that is known as being a good overtaking spot. And so that is the spot that it happens. And we were lucky that we were treated to so many overtakes there this weekend, when historically it's just not a good track. I think that's thanks to the 2022 aero regulations, though, that allow you to be able to follow.
When we thought we had made it almost the whole race with no DNFs, Valtteri pulled over with a lack of power, retiring, bringing Max Verstappen his 28th victory from 10th place. Lewis took second place, up from 7th, plus the fastest lap, followed by his teammate George Russell in third. Then we had Sainz, Perez, Leclerc, Norris, Alonso, Ocon, and Vettel finishing up in the points this week. It was pretty much it. The podium was a total repeat of France last weekend. Same exact lineup, same exact celebration. That's that. So now we've got Mercedes tied with Ferrari on podiums this season. And I thought this was an interesting factoid that I'm going to drop. Prior to today, Red Bull had only won one race in F1 history from outside the top six on the grid, and that was when Daniel Ricciardo won in the 2017 Azerbaijan Grand Prix from P10 as well. So,
no, he won from P6 in that race.
Oh, sorry. F1, Formula One must have gotten it wrong because I copied and pasted it. We can double check.
I'm pretty sure.
You want to double check while I keep going?
I'll check right now.
Okay.
Keep going.
You're not going to like my next question, so we'll just we'll just give it just a second.
This is taking too long.
It's fine. I'm writing it down that it needs to be cut.
Yeah, let's not admit we copy and paste either.
Okay, so I'll just say it again.
Just go with P10 if that's what you got from F1.
Okay. And one other factoid that I wanted to drop in here because I think it's pretty interesting. Prior to today, Red Bull had only won one race in their Formula One history from outside the top six on the grid, when Daniel Ricciardo was triumphant in the 2017 Azerbaijan Grand Prix. So that's that. That was the race. It was an interesting race. Lots of overtakes, more than I thought there were going to be. Great action. So I really enjoyed it, and I saved it for the end. I told you I was going to, but we have to talk about it, and it's our justice to talk about it. It's our right to talk about it, but we have to talk about the Ferrari strategy calls.
It's more like an obligation.
It's an obligation.
If you have a Formula One podcast and doing a race recap, you have to talk about Ferrari shitting the bed. Ultimately, I don't really actually know if, other than the poor call on hards, I think really the strategy fell apart when they decided to start on mediums. They really should have started on softs. They probably knew that they had screwed up when the tire blankets came off, and they're like, oh, it's weird. Mercedes is on softs. We got the Red Bulls on softs. I think we probably should have done something different. And they should have. but they chose to start on the mediums. And then with that, they should have then decided that they were going to have to go long on the second medium stint. Like, you know, Lewis Hamilton did. He went long on his second stint, which was mediums, but they could have gone long medium or short medium, long medium, and then switched to softs. But instead, for Charles Leclerc, they went to the hards. And they shouldn't have done that because they should have looked at the Alpines falling through the field and said, I don't think hards are the right decision. We knew they had to change to a different compound. You have to run 2 different compounds in a race. So I think they should have left Charles. I think what they should have done is if they started on the mediums, they should have gone long in the second stint of mediums, tried to do what Carlos Sainz did. He did 30 laps on his second medium stint and then put on softs. It didn't work as well as Lewis Hamilton, but I think that's kind of the second part to this, is that they just really didn't have the pace today. So I think ultimately what's going to happen is the debrief is going to be long. It's going to be shitty. Matteo's probably going to hopefully throw some Italian food around, because that's what I imagine happens in the Ferrari motorhome when things go poorly. But ultimately, I don't think that this will... Ferrari will probably chalk it up to like the car just didn't have the pace, instead of saying, you know, our strategy isn't right. Considering Carlos Sainz literally said going into this weekend that the focus is always on strategy and strategy isn't the problem. From the outside looking in, it's looking like strategy is the problem.
I saw this hilarious tweet that was like, if you have Sky Sports or Sky Cloud, then press the red button and you can become the Ferrari strategy.
I'm fairly confident that I, who's never participated in a legitimate racing team, could have been smart enough to not put Charles Leclerc on hards. I mean, I was screaming at the TV when it happened. Granted, they must have had some data that backed it up. It is interesting. I listened to an interview with Christian Horner at the end of the race. He was like, yeah, we were going to start on hards, but then we switched to softs at the last minute because we couldn't get them turned on our way to the grid. Ferrari, why did you think that hards were the way to go? That is what I need to know.
We may never know.
We won't know. We won't know because they won't tell us anything. But I mean, it was bigger than the tires. The tire strategy for Charles was the downfall, but it ultimately was more than just the tire strategy for Carlos Sainz, because him and Lewis were basically on the same strategy, and Lewis finished second and Carlos finished fourth, and he really ultimately wasn't going to challenge for P3. They were making it out to be, and I was like, I don't think this is going to happen. I really do think Checo should have been able to get around him at the end of the day. Which is a weird thing for me to say. I'm just such a Checo fan. I'm just so not a Max fan.
All right. Well, I'll take us into our next piece, because I'm fucked and I have officially been dropped to P15. So I'm not out yet, but I'm for sure getting a tattoo of Megan's choice at the end of this season, as Megan sits in P4 at over almost 1,200 points. 12,000 points, excuse me. Math, numbers, difficult. Never been good at them. And Scooter was our Max Verstappen of the week. Gavo 11 was our Lewis Hamilton. And Loving F1 was our George Russell. And do not worry, my team is set for after the summer break.
I just don't understand how you can't. You have an alert on your phone now.
I know.
PJ posts in the chat.
You know what's weird is I don't get notifications. So maybe
you should turn them on.
Yeah, it happens. My apologies, everybody. And I didn't place any bets this weekend because I'm clearly shit out of luck when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Okay, let's chat about the race some more. So I've got some random questions. I'm going to throw them at you. You give me answers.
Okay.
With the Red Bull qualifying performance, did you think Verstappen would take the win? You just have to, yes or no.
No.
It doesn't have to be long thought out. Okay, without the DRS situation, would Hamilton have taken pole?
Yes.
She's contemplating. Over Russell?
Yes.
If Hamilton had taken pole or Russell had taken pole, if it was a Mercedes front row lockout, do you think it would have been a Mercedes win?
Yes.
They could have held off Verstappen.
This podcast is brought to you by Racing Thread, Formula One clothing for any occasion.
Their clothing features subtle, evocative, embroidered designs for your favorite F1 moments.
From Ricardo's Monza shoey to Sebastian's Australian scooter ride.
From Lewis's Brazilian comeback to Carlando's round of golf.
Whether you're out to dinner with friends, watching the race at home, or cheering in the grandstands,
gone are the embarrassing sponsor logos. Instead, Racing Thread is F1 clothing you are comfortable wearing anywhere.
Right now, Dirty Driving listeners can get 15% off Racing Thread's entire range of t-shirts, sweatshirts, and polos using the code Dirty Driving.
That's Dirty Driving, all capitals, no spaces, for 15% off their entire clothing range.
Head over to racingthread.com to shop F1 racewear for anywhere. Yes.
Strategy would have been different. Scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it that Mercedes gets a win this year? 10 being like it's definitely going to happen. 1, hell no. 1 is like Nicholas Latifi winning.
8.73.
What race do you think it's going to happen at?
Lewis Hamilton could take Brazil again.
I'm going Coda. I want him to win at Coda.
You're going Coda?
I went literally for no literal racing logic other than I want Mercedes win of this year to be at the race that I'm at. And I will be screaming. I'll wear all purple that day.
All purple. I wore my purple Mercedes hat all day today.
I just genuinely feel like it needs to happen in America so that I can see it in person. Literally no facts backing this up. Just this is what I want.
You got to manifest it, Megan. You got to get the candles out. You got to do the prayer circle.
I'm just hoping it doesn't happen. Well, I mean, look, if it happens before then, I'm going to be sad. I'm going to be angry. But then they just got to repeat it for me to see in person. I'm asking so much of them. I'm asking so much.
You might get it. You might get it.
I really think so. I really think I'm going to get it. Okay, that brings us to what I've decided that we are going to do like a little mini formation lap chat this recap. Really for no other reason other than there was so much conversation this weekend about engine allocations, gearbox allocations. So let's dive into it. I did do a little spreadsheet. I know, can't ever not get away with not doing a spreadsheet about some bullshit in Formula One. But let's quickly do like a little recap on engine penalties and how they work. So every driver/car combo gets a certain amount of new power unit components that can be taken throughout the year before penalties can occur. So for the internal combustion unit, the turbocharger, the MGUH, the MGUK, they're all allowed 3 changes without a penalty. The engine store and the control on electronics, they're allowed 2 before a penalty. And then the engine exhaust system, they're allowed 8 without a penalty. The first time an additional element is taken, the driver gets a 10-place grid penalty. Every additional time after that, the driver gets a 5-place grid penalty. If a driver incurs penalties that are greater than 15 places, they start at the back of the grid, which is what Pierre Gasly should have had happen this weekend. If multiple penalties are taken in a weekend by multiple drivers, like we saw in Canada, both Charles Leclerc and Yuki Tsunoda took penalties, then it is based off of their qualifying time. So that's like the nuts and bolts of how the penalties for engines work, or power units, fancy term. Currently, here is the status quo, Katie. Correct me if I miss anybody. Charles Leclerc and Yuki Tsunoda took penalties in Canada. Fernando Alonso took penalties in both Spain and Austria. Pierre Gasly took them this weekend in Hungary. Valtteri Bottas took them in Austria with Alonso. And Sainz and Magnussen took them last weekend in France. They took them because they exceeded one of the components' allotted amounts for this year. Now, here's where it gets spicy, Katie. This weekend, Max Verstappen and Checo took their they're at their cap. So the next time they take those components, they will be at their max and will incur grid penalties. I'm thinking we might see them during the triple header. I don't think it'll be at Zandvoort because, Max likes to win his home race. But other than them, literally everyone but Daniel Ricciardo have hit their max on one or more of the components. LOL.
Jeez.
Literally, Daniel Ricciardo is the only driver currently that has one more before he incurs a penalty of all of the components. So he's really the only one that's safe from a penalty at this point, quote unquote safe. But the way it's looking is everybody else on the grid is going to take a penalty at some point. We still have 9 races to go. It's just when they take them. And I swear if the Mercedes drivers or the Ferrari drivers take them in Dakota, I'm going to be pissed.
That will be a big bummer if they do.
Unless we have something like Carlos Sainz performance in France. The other part of this is that there's a gearbox penalties if you take new penalties. This year, we actually had new rules for the gearboxes. So this year, new rules went into place that said teams have a pool of 4 gearboxes for the season, meaning they can swap them around without penalty at their time of choice. Same, max of 4, same kind of philosophy as the components for the power unit. You can use them. This is your allocation. Once you hit your allocation, penalties will incur. With that being said, their gearbox penalties are divided into 2 pools, max of 4 for each. You have the gearbox case and cassette, and then you have the gearbox driveline, gear change components, and auxiliary components. So a penalty, let's talk about those penalties. It's a 5-place grid penalty for each. So if you change both at the same time, it's a total of a 10-place grid penalty. This is different from the previous rule. In years before, I don't really know if I like this rule change. I don't really know if it helps them, if it hurts them. This is where I think we can have some kind of cool conversations about this, is if a competitor competes for 6 consecutive Grand Prix with the same gearbox, then they can take a new one without incurring a penalty. That was the previous rule. If they change their gearbox before those 6 consecutive races, then they would have to take a grid penalty. So it was almost incentivizing them to go long, to use them for a longer period of time to maximize their life before they receive a penalty. I think in terms of sustainability, that's an interesting conversation about trying to maximize how many races you use an individual component. I don't know if the whole pool, the max of 4, really changes that mentality, though. Interesting thoughts. I think as we take more gear penalties, it'll be interesting to look back and see how that rule has affected things. As of right now, no one has taken gearbox penalties, but in the danger zone are Danger zone, Tom Cruise. I'm such an idiot for just realizing I use that terminology. Both Charles Leclerc and Mick Schumacher have hit their max on both components inside of the gearbox. And Valtteri Bottas and Guan Yu Zhao are on their max of the case and cassette. So penalties are going to start happening for gearboxes here shortly as well. So I felt like it was interesting as this is our last race before the break, technically this is the mid-season break. We're over the mid-season. That was 2 races ago. We are in an interesting position where there's going to be a lot more penalties taken, I think, during that triple header and beyond. And it will be interesting to see which teams take them at what points.
All right, for Megan, actually you can pick. Do we want to start with winners or losers this week?
Let's start with, the real winner was Red Bull, specifically Maxi. So maybe let's start with losers.
Okay. I can start with mine. Mine's Pierre Gasly. At first I was going to choose Ferrari because Ferrari. But after I realized that my Pierre, my sweet boy, my wonderful underdog, underrated man who I just care about so much, is pointless in the last 5 races.
Ay caramba.
Which is why I'm choosing him for my loser. He had a shit qualifying. He started from the pit lane and he made it up to P12, which was a decent run, but he is pointless in the last 5 races. And that to me just does not feel very much so like Pierre Gasly at all. And so he's my loser going into the summer break. And I hope he hears this and thinks about his actions and comes back and shines after the summer break.
I know. I really, really, really wanted more for him. I'm hoping that this time will be good for him. I mean, how many topless pictures is he going to have?
I'm going with 4 at least.
More or less? Higher or lower than George Russell?
Higher.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Okay, let's take a tally. At the end of the summer break, we're going to tally how many photos each of those 2 take shirtless. Because George Russell likes to, not only is he Mr. Saturday, but he is Mr. I like to not wear shirts. I post about it on the internet. I mean, I'm all for it. I prefer Pierre Gasly, but it is what it is. Semantics. My loser for this weekend, look. I went through a lot in my thought process about this loser. It was Checo. It was Ferrari. It was Carlos. It was Haas. It was Danny Rick. It was Alpine. I mean, basically everybody but Mercedes and Max at one point I thought was the loser this weekend. Oh, and Lando. He was the other, so there was 4 drivers on the grid that weren't at some point my loser. And ultimately I decided to go for my boy, Mr. Bucket Hat, Valtteri Bottas. For 3 distinct reasons. First off, he was back in Q3 and I was ecstatic. I was happy. I was like, P8, it's going to be pretty. Then the race happens. He's running in 10th. He loses out to both Astons. And then he DNFs because of his stupid Ferrari power unit. So I'm sorry. Valtteri, you're it. You are my loser. You're a winner in life, but you're a loser at the Hungarian Grand Prix. How many ass photos are we going to see over the summer break? I'm hoping for at least 2.
I think 2 is a good guess. I was going to say 3, but that's 1 a week, so that's aggressive.
Very aggressive.
Very aggressive. Which brings me to my winner. I chose Mercedes because how could we not? It's the second.
Let's go.
Megan's in her shirt. We love it. It's the second 2-3 weekend in a row. Mercedes led more laps today in the race than they have at any other race total combined this year. So I feel like the energy's back, the focus is back, the cars are back, and Lewis now has more podiums than Charles this season, which is mind-blowing.
Lewis doesn't have a first.
He doesn't have a win, but has more podiums, has one more podium. He has 6 versus Charles is 5. So we're getting there. And he currently has the longest active streak in Formula One with 5 consecutive podium finishes. So that's that. George got his maiden pole. Sorry, I feel like I was talking a lot about Lewis, but all in all, I think we are set to see Mercedes do well the rest of this season.
And really, we got to see Toto Wolff in his proud dad moment. He was so excited when Georgie Kins got the pole.
So excited.
I'm so sorry to everyone. I'm calling him Maxikins and Georgiekins. I've just decided that they felt like little children this weekend, which I know is demeaning and not right, but in my head, it just made sense. I'm sorry. I don't care. My winner is Landokins. Okay, I hate myself for that. We're done. And really, I had so many kind of back and forths with my loser. I had just as many flops. They were flip-flops, fish flopping between who I wanted to be my winner. And like I said, it was between 4 drivers, but I swear in my head I wrote it about all 4. And for the majority of times, it was going to be me picking Max Verstappen. But ultimately, I decided he got the win, so he really is the biggest winner out of this. But my personal choice of winner is Lando Norris. And this might be a controversial win in choice, but do think that my logic justifies this decision. They had good pace on Friday, which I know wasn't necessarily representative of what was going to come this weekend, but I felt like it was A, an indication that they were starting to understand the car and the upgrades, and B, a confidence boost, which I think they need at the end of the day. Then on Saturday, Lando qualifies P4. In the race, he loses positions, but he lost positions to Mercedes and Red Bull and Ferrari, which we didn't think he was going to hold on to. Like, if you thought that, you were wrong. I'm sorry. McLaren doesn't have the pace, but he ultimately ended up best of the rest ahead of the Alpines, which I think was a bit of good luck for him in terms of the fact that Alpine shit their strategy by putting the drivers on hards. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it was the best possible way for McLaren to leave the midseason for Lando, not for Danny Rick, but it's kind of my general thought process. Was it cool that Lando literally finished like 60 plus seconds behind Charles? No, but he was best of the rest. So considering their fight is with Alpine and not with the top 3 teams, for him to finish ahead of them was a good moment for him. I don't know. Roast my logic if you want to. That's my justification. We already know that Max won. We already know that the Mercedes won this weekend. So Lando's the best of the rest right now.
He is indeed. Every week I write down the championship standings in my notes notebook, and he has just been strong and steady right there at the top with everyone else. So
it is weird, though, that we haven't had a win from outside the top 3 teams. I'm expecting in the back season for there to be like a one-off race winner, and I really hope that it's Lando this year.
Yeah, it's
just
time.
Like Esteban randomly won the Hungarian Grand Prix last year. I'm really hoping that we have a Lando Norris victory, a random McLaren success, and a little bit in the Monza light.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, it's really hard to do things. How do weather people do this?
She's pointing behind her. If you're listening, she's like showing off her Monza victory poster. Mine's on the other side, so I'm not doing a good job at it either.
I just don't know how other people do this. And up next, we must get through our honorable mention, which is the Alpines this week. Again, they've been honorable 2 weeks in a row. They had better pace than their McLaren rivals, even though they had that bad strategy call, which I've kind of been roasting by going onto those hard tires. Ultimately, they both finished in the points. Yes, it was behind Lando, but 2 cars in the points is better than 1 in, 1 out, and ahead. My logic, again, whatever. Both Alpines have been in the points for 3 consecutive races, and I think that we can now, Katie, what do you think, fully say that they are, of teams, the best of the rest team?
I think we can say that. I think we're at a point
Fully.
where we can say that.
Lando might have ended this race best of the rest, but I think in terms of the season, Alpine has definitely got the pace and are the best of the rest team. For a while, Mercedes was the best of the rest. They got promoted to the top 3.
Which, thank the sweet Lord or whatever God or gods or deity you pray to. Everyone just thank them for that because we needed it. Our hidden gem of the week was Lewis Hamilton hanging out with the W Series ladies. He hung out with them during the weekend. They had a support race as well, and he said that it's hard to believe how much the series has grown since starting in 2019, and these athletes are an inspiration to me and to many others around the world. So just wanted to highlight that Megan and I will get to see a W Series race when we're in COTA, which we're super excited about. And we might just take part of that episode to maybe talk a little bit about what we think about the W Series as well.
It definitely feels like a fault on my part for not following it a little bit closer this season like I intended to. But I do follow the results when I'm not able to watch the race. I love it. I think the whole concept of the series is really interesting, and I definitely want to do a full deep dive on it, learn more about it, talk to people who follow it, because at the end of the day, I really want to see a female driver in Formula One. I'm not sure if there's a true mechanism for them moving from the W Series into F1, but it does bring me hope that that might be a possibility in the future. And the day there's a woman in F1, we are going to become the biggest fans of her.
Hell yeah, we are. We already are fans of her.
All the merch.
Even though we don't know it.
Next week is not a race week. It's the summer break, which we all need. Me and Katie need it. The drivers need it. The team principals need it. The engineers need it. The commentators really need it. They were talking about how tired they were and ready for a break. I did miss Will Buxton and the ice lollies this weekend. Not that they were needed, but it was funny. July saw races come fast and hot at us, so we'll be very glad for a little bit of downtime, not too much downtime. Katie and I are still going to be here bringing you all the F1 content. We're taking 1 week off, so there won't be an episode next week. But the following week, we are going to be bringing you a team deep dive, followed by the mid-season race recap to get you ready to get back into the action. Because don't worry, after this break, I'm like kind of scared to say this. After this break, we have a triple header. So it's going to be a lot of content really quickly. And yes, my heart just broke and I stuttered through all of this, but you should know why. Triple headers are rough on them. Thank you so much for listening to another episode. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us at Dirty Driving Pod on Twitter and Instagram.
Until next time. Stay dirty.